to the next slide, please. And Elsie, I think you're going to talk about this a little bit.
Yes. Just before I talk about the home improvement group a little bit, I want to let you know what phase 4 is about. And the basic philosophy of phase 4 is this for the women. Our story is more than what has happened to us. So the focus of phase 4 is to develop contemplative practices so that women can be rooted in the truths of who they were created to be, to make space for silence, to learn to be still, to trust their inner wise voice, instead of looking to others to tell them who we are. Rather than focus only on branches and the visible part of their tree, the women learn to go in and down and grow an extensive root system, practicing self-care, gratitude, letting go, welcoming the future, moving towards being a fully resourced, queenly self. Mm-hmm. And I have 2 comments from women who have been through phase 4. This is what Carly says. This group and the sharing of mutual threads between our stories has been a very meaningful experience during a season of darkness. It's been the reminder that there is more to come. We are not alone, and that we are being transformed as we continue to hope and lean into the journey. And Nicole says, group has meant I am no longer in the dark, no longer confused, no longer alone. I walk in light, in clarity, and in meaningful friendship with women who deeply understand and identify my story, and I with theirs. It's a wonderful experience, or a wonderful opportunity for the women to be able to choose to come to phase 4. The home improvement group will be explained more by Wayne and Esther in just a little while. We're very grateful for them as facilitators. It's a support and accountability group for men, as Brian already said, who want to learn healthier ways of being in relationship. So we will wait for that until Wayne and Esther are on shortly. So we're going to move now to the next slide, and Lydia will begin this.
So in our women's support groups, we do many things, but one of the things that I think has been one of the most important things that changes women's beliefs about themselves and perspectives about what's happened and hope for the future has been when we talk about what they commonly hear about abuse in relationships, what the common perceptions are and beliefs are, what the beliefs are that we hear and that we're taught. And then we take those common beliefs, which I'm calling myths, and we reframe them for them. And in reframing and watching our words, looking at how we say things and how we perceive things, it changes how women see themselves. And I mean, what we hope is that women will see the truth about their values, about what's happened to them, and about who's responsible for the abuse. We really work hard with the women to help them build compassion and kindness for themselves as they walk this very difficult journey. We give them information and tools to help them make important decisions that they're often working through. But we try really hard not to advise them because we do not know the whole of their story. Can I have the next slide? So what
we'll move through these slides quite quickly too, because we want Esther and Wayne to have time.
So what we talk about is dominant discourse. So, and we talk about common beliefs and truth. We acknowledge that on this journey, women experience abuse, not only from partners choosing to abuse them, but also sometimes from institutions and services. So what we say is each partner is, what's the dominant discourse says is each partner is equally responsible for the problem. And what we say is
abusers are 100% responsible for the abuse.
Next slide, please. The dominant discourse excuses men for their abusive behavior. And so it says men who use abuse are out of control.
Men who use abuse are in control and make choices.
Next slide, please. Often the common belief is that women are attracted to men who use abuse. They say, in fact, to me, that they attract men who abuse. They sometimes have said, I must have an L on my forehead, but we reframe that.
Men who use abuse initially conceal their abusive behavior.
Next slide, please. Confusion is really a primary experience for women on this journey. They'll say he doesn't hit me or physically hurt me, so it must not be abuse. So the common belief is abuse is limited to physical abuse, but we reframe it.
Abuse is pervasive in the relationship and comes in many forms.
Next slide, please. We also are aware that many come to relationships with ideas of how many men come to relationships with ideas of how they should lead or how they should be in charge, but without understanding themselves or how they can be wholehearted and the responsibility in being in relationship with another. So the dominant discourse says women and abusive men are interested in relationships in similar ways. And we say,
men who use abuse in relationships view relationships from a framework of power and control.
Next slide, please. We also know that we only see a glimpse of a woman's journey. We know it's difficult if she stays or if she goes, but the dominant discourse says there's something wrong with the woman.
The woman is surviving something that is very difficult.
Next slide, please. We emphasize this reframe a lot because this is a common belief and is prevalent. Women will lose weight, they'll go to counseling, they'll stop asking their partner to do things around the house or home. They will not require their counselor to do anything with their children because the dominant belief is that the woman is responsible for the problems in the relationship. But we say,
the problem is her partner's abusive behavior. This is having a major impact on her.
Next slide, please. We also know that leaving is very risky for women and for children, but the dominant discourse says women make the choice to stay with an abusive partner.
Women stay for a multitude of complex reasons, including managing safety.
Yes, and we remind them of that. The next slide, please. So society and churches do not address men's responsibility for choosing violence. And so the dominant belief is also women believe that abusive behavior is normal. That's what people say about women who are in relationships where their partner is choosing abuse, but we reframe it for them.
Society does not talk about men's violence and silences, minimizes and dismisses women's experiences of abuse.
Next slide, please. The dominant discourse, what people usually believe is women have low expectations of relationships and accept abusive treatment, but we say other than that.
Women continue to resist abuse and fight for peace, equality, and safety in their relationships.
Thank you. This is one piece of work that we do with the women. We just really work hard to reframe beliefs and reframe words for them so that they can have a perspective and understand what's happened to them in a new way with different eyes and to really move forward in that way. So thank you for this. Elsie, I think you were going to introduce.
We're not quite ready for that yet. I think we should say that the support group meets in this room, for example. Because of COVID, we've had to distance. So this gives you a glimpse of what the room looks like. We always put flowers on the table. We bring music into the room. We do what we can to make it a peaceful, inviting environment. I also think I should say that this program, the End Abuse program, was actually birthed in the early 90s by the MCC Women's Concerns Committee, which were still functioning actively at the time. It was a long gestation, and the program actually began in 1999 with a half-time person I came on board in 2007, and it has been a wonderful experience. Lydia and I always say it's the best job in the world because we really do see women coming back to life, and that's such a privilege. Now, Wayne and Esther are our co-partners in our work in that they work with the men. And as Lydia already mentioned, Esther also facilitates our phase 2 group. We have an interesting situation in our phase 1 group this year in that 5 of the women in the group have partners in the men's group. So that's a really interesting opportunity where we have both stories given to us. So I'd like to turn this over now to Wayne and Esther. Very happy to have you come along on this journey to Saskatchewan today. So we'll take it from there and we'll ask for the next slide too, please.
So thanks for the opportunity to present on the home improvement program. I've been involved with the end abuse program since 2009, working with the women. And then Wayne and I began working with home improvement for men in 2017, and we're currently facilitating our 9th group. The Home Improvement Group for Men is a 15-week program for men who have been abusive in their relationships and wish or need to learn healthier ways of being in relationship. The men attend because the group may have been recommended by a friend, a counselor, Crown Council, community organization of some sort, and some come because they themselves know that they need to get help, or that their partners may have asked them or even told them they have to come. So some attend reluctantly, some are eager participants. Their relationships may be in various stages. Some are with their partners, some are temporarily separated, and some are permanently separated. But all are there because of needing to improve their relationships. We currently have 22 men in our group. It's a full room of men sitting in a circle.
In that same room you saw.
Yeah, in the boardroom that you saw, that's right. We try to social distance a little bit by angling the chairs a bit and things, but it's a big group. The men may return to the next group after they have finished one group if they want to, and we have numerous returnees in each group, some several times, as Brian mentioned in his own experience. We find that the returnees are often very helpful in the group discussions because they're there because they have found it helpful for themselves.
So I'll go down a few of our main principles. Well, we'll highlight, I guess, what we do call the main principles approaches in the facilitation we do. And top of the list, and in that there are 6 actually partners, 1 in your group and the other 5 in phase 1 in the women's. Confidentiality, and Esther in particular has to work hard on that, but she is ironclad, I would say, about confidentiality. And there needs to be that, or else there'll be a loss of trust. And so we always acknowledge it takes courage for men to come to a group for men who abuse their partners. And so we always say, like in Vegas, what is said in the group stays in the group. If we meet outside of the group, we don't chat with them or indicate we know them generally. And as mentioned with Esther's facilitation, she has to be so high on that. We also show respect to the men. And we know we model that, and because that gets fed back to us, and because we are mutually respectful, but we also respect the men. And in connection to that is no blaming. We're aware that if we don't show respect, and likewise, if we shame or blame the men, they'll learn nothing other than resistance. And but we therefore don't focus on what they have done wrong, but what they can do right, how they might make their relationships better. We do address the different types of abuse and the misuse of power, however, but not as a blame game. We also focus on the skills and tools necessary to help men achieve healthy relationships. The focus is on them and their behaviors and not on their partners or ex-partners. We continually bring the conversation back, if that comes up, to what they are responsible for and how they may change and be a better partner. We also relate the information to how the person may need to change or address the relationships with their own children, as numerous men are no longer in relationship with an intimate partner. And we acknowledge that this aspect of the material put to good use may help in any kind of relationship, at work, in the wider family, with friends, colleagues, etc. The final thing we really emphasize is, and because we know from our personal experience, we say change is very difficult and takes time. There is no quick fix to patterns of behavior that have been ingrained for years, and they should not expect, therefore, that in a short time of 15 weeks, their partners will suddenly start to jump with joy to see that they're changed men as partners now.
So we're going to look a little bit at the structure of each of the evenings. We meet every Monday night from 6:30 till 9 p.m. And each evening is comprised of a time for sharing and for teaching content. Around the fifth evening, we do a complete body relaxation exercise with the men, which in itself is very different and unusual for men to do. But after that evening, we begin each evening with a short time to relax and spend some time just breathing. The men often rush to get to group after a really busy day at work, and they just need to stop, be present, and be able to focus. So then we spend the first part of each evening facilitating a check-in. We go around the circle and the men share what they want to about their week, what might have gone well, what was difficult, as well as what they might have found helpful or have applied from the previous week's content. Our check-in sometimes takes about half of the evening. One may think that men don't share much, but as time goes on, we find the men become very vulnerable in check-in and share both their successes and their failures. This has been an ongoing surprise for us. The rest of the evening is discussion-led teaching. So what are the topics we cover? We discuss the importance of self-awareness and self-regulation, the effects of our upbringing and how it might apply in our relationships now, the types of abuse and power and control, communication skills, gender and our society's expectation of men. You know, men don't show emotion, men don't cry. But it's interesting, on the second evening of our current group, one man shared through tears how he realized he had not done many of the good ingredients that we had mentioned, and that he had done lots and lots of the bad ones that we talked about. And he was in tears, and Wayne's comment was, real men do cry. And since then, we have had numerous tears shed. Emotions are very real and raw at times. So we address emotions, we address their feelings, the importance of empathy and compassion. We spend time discussing anger and how to manage it. And we also discuss skills and tools that would be helpful for them to cope better. The man in the video, Brian, in the video clip at the beginning mentioned two of the topics he found most helpful, which interestingly is what most men mention, and that is self-awareness and the ABCDE model of emotions.
Which he kind of described.
He kind of described it. The action happens, but that's the only thing we can't control, the action that happens. But every single man, woman, and person can change their beliefs. And we always have this set belief of what we think it should be, and we need to look at that. Depending on what our belief is, there's usually a consequence, an emotion that comes as a consequence, which causes people to decide how they're going to respond. And then there's always an effect. And it's interesting, many men tell us that once they become aware of their behaviors, they have found that it is their beliefs and their thinking that has to change. And that's been really a a theme that men have said after they finish.
So in conclusion, here are a few takeaways. For the men, some of the comments that are on the questionnaires they receive or the evaluations have been, the session on our beliefs was most important. I just need to change my beliefs, as Esther has just mentioned. Another, I think through the consequences and long-term repercussions more now. Another, I build up now instead of putting down. I encourage them instead of shaming. Still another, I have more patience to listen to my partner. Finally, I've become a better person. And from a woman who came to the When Love Hurts group, but also her husband, who came twice to our home improvement group, we hear her sharing, thank you for what all the people in groups at MCC did to help us on our path. We will be forever grateful for that love, support, and guidance. We are managing well. So as we work with these men, we are aware again that change is very difficult, and we have no illusion, and we say this at the beginning, that somehow marriages will magically improve in 15 weeks, or that necessarily they'll ever get back together with a partner. But the feedback we get from the men is that they appreciate the home improvement groups very much. And for ourselves, we have learned much from these men. And often, as we leave the MCC building on our way home and reflect on the evening, we say, what a privilege we have to facilitate these groups. Thank you.
Thank you.
You might want to slide it to the next slide and then we're done. But Esther, I wonder if you might want to talk about Fraser Valley Institution. We didn't mention that at all in this.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I can. I can say that myself and another facilitator go into the Fraser Valley Institution, and we lead a group that is called Respectful Relationships for Survivors of Trauma. And we use the When Love Hurts material from the book that we use in phase 1 for the first part, the first half of the 10 weeks, and the second half of the 10 weeks. We work with them on good relationships and what it is to build a good relationship. And the women in prison, every single one of them have had trauma, I can guarantee, from day one pretty well. And don't believe that can be a relationship without abuse in it. And so they have found it really, really helpful just to hear that, yes, it is possible. And it's a real privilege to be able to go into the prison to do that work.
Thank you. Thank you for doing that. Yes, and Esther, I really appreciated that you and Wayne shared how the groups work, because we do that also in the women's group, which is we have a sharing time where women can share what they feel comfortable sharing, knowing that whatever they say in the group is confidential and remains there. And sometimes women share their hearts right away, and sometimes they do not share until they get into phase 2. It takes some time to build trust. And then the last half, we do the facilitated learning piece where women also share their story and listen to each other as they have experienced these a variety of things. Elsie, is there something else? I think that I missed talking about phase 4 very much, but I know that you did.
Mhm.
It's a year-long process, right? With 24 sessions, and women
Yes.
pay to attend.
They pay a very small fee, actually,
Right.
for what they're getting, because our facilitator is Kathy Hardy, who is a singer-songwriter, retreat leader, spiritual director. She now has a spiritual direction school, and she has designed the curriculum for the women in phase 4, specifically given their past experience. And so she's a gift to us. We're very grateful that she's able to do this. I think another thing we could talk about just a little bit is the power of the group process, of the whole group experience. Like one of the women on the UFV video said, phase 1 was like counseling on steroids. A number of women have said that. One woman said she'd had 37 years of counseling, but nothing was as helpful as this group had been. She was in phase 4, had taken the other 3 phases as well. Not to discount the need for therapy or therapists to do their work with the women as well. But there's something powerful about women being together in a room with other women who really understand what they're going through, who really get it. And the sharing of burdens is just amazing in terms of a healing power. And you know, people often will wonder how many of the couples or the people that we have worked with, women and men, how many of them get together again? And there are some, like the example that Wayne just gave. That's a couple that I just never really thought could possibly be together again, and yet they are, and they're doing well. There's another couple that is back together. They have 7 children, and MCC Canada is actually in the process of videoing their story. So you'll probably be able to see that eventually, I hope. So we do know there are couples who do come back together after they've done enough healing. Esther always says to the men, change is hard, change is possible, change takes a long time. And she reports to me that one of the men in the group said, I wish you would stop saying that. But it's true. Esther, I wonder if you could explain the 4 degrees and hold idea. when it comes to change.
Yeah, right. We have a whole list in our toolbox that we go through the night that we do the relaxation and breathing exercise. And when we do that relaxation and breathing exercise, I think the men are the body relaxation. They're just so shocked to begin with when we start it, but it's about a 10-15 minute exercise to go through their whole bodies, and they are just so relaxed at the end.
And I'll often reference that on the questionnaires. But anyway, back to the 4 degrees and hold.
And so after we do the relaxation exercise, we say we've got this whole toolbox of things that we could suggest that you could work on. And one of those is the 4 degrees and hold. And we say, we've already talked about how difficult change is. So we're not going to say, you just need to change. That's not going to help you one bit. But I want you to think of one thing or possibly 2 that you can change in. And we say that, and then we say, it's just like if you were in a ship and you needed to move slightly over one of the things that they say is
course, right?
Change course 4 degrees and hold. And so we say, take that 1 or 2 things that you've thought of in your mind, and I want you to think about changing and holding, changing course and holding on that one thing or those 2 things. And the next night we come back and say, how did that go? Were you able to hold on that, those 2 things that you thought of? And there's a little bit of discussion on that. They blew it or they didn't or whatever. And we leave it and we say, okay, don't go any further, just stay there. And then we'll suggest maybe in a few weeks, if you've done really well on that, do you think you could go another 4 degrees? So it's just that whole thing around how difficult change is. But if you take a little bit at a time and hold it there, then make sure that you stay
and you
there.
Diagram that,
and we diagram it, of course, on it,
Mm-hmm.
as we do it. And
Yes.
and the interesting thing, if you do 4 degrees and hold, how wide that gets after maybe a month or 2 or 3.
or a year or 2 or 3, or
Yes.
Yeah. And speaking of the flip chart is our best friend in our work.
Goodness,
We
yes.
don't use PowerPoint. The flip chart is an amazing tool where women see their experiences and their words go onto the flip chart.
Yeah.
And sometimes we flip back to things that have been discussed 2 or 3 weeks earlier that again apply to a situation that's come up.
Mhm.
So we love flip charts.
for
Some
the
of
men
them.
too. Very similar.
Yeah. Mhm. One of the other things that the men mention in their feedback forms, I want to say, is that they really appreciate Wayne and Esther. They feel so accepted by them. I know Esther has told me the men have said things like, I can't talk like this so openly and honestly anywhere else. And they appreciate the opportunity to do that.
Mhm.
And I suggest that I believe the reason that trust is there is because Esther visits for about an hour with every man who plans to come to the group before the group begins. and asks them some really pointed questions and hears his story as much as he is able to tell. And she explains the group to him too. And by the end of that hour, there's been a certain establishment of trust in Esther. And so when the group actually begins, the men just seem to take off on their journey of vulnerability and thinking about change. I also believe that even if a husband and wife, ex-husband and wife, don't ever get back together again, because sometimes there's just too much water under the bridge, too much pain. But if they can learn to co-parent in a respectful and kind